The air was thick with tension that night, heavier than the usual weight that hung around our family dinners. The kind of tension that makes your chest feel tight and your stomach twist into knots. It was a routine evening, one I had grown so accustomed to, yet nothing felt normal. My father sat at the head of the table, his sharp eyes scanning over his empire. His usual air of arrogance loomed over everything. My mother, as always, quietly served the food, her face masked with the tired smile she had perfected over the years, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. And me, I sat there, unnoticed. Invisible, just like I always was. You know, I've been thinking, my father's voice cut through the room like a blade, breaking the silence that had hung between us for minutes. Maybe it's time we talked about our future. I could feel my heart rate pick up, the familiar sensation creeping up my spine. I knew what was coming. My father, the man who had built his world on discipline, control, and expectations, was about to throw another judgment my way. I had been through this before, but somehow tonight felt different. His words were always sharp, but tonight they felt more pointed, more cutting. The spoon clattered against the side of my plate as I tried to steady my hand. It was as though my father could see right through me, and I could feel it. The deep, suffocating weight of his gaze. The words I had been dreading for years were finally here, hanging in the air like a dark cloud. She's too stupid for college. Look at her grades. Look at her, she can barely pass high school. There it was. The sting, the slap in the face, the label that had followed me for as long as I could remember. Too stupid. Too dumb, just not good enough. My hands shook as I gripped my fork, trying to keep my composure. It wasn't the first time he had said something like this, but for some reason, tonight, it shattered me. My mind swirled with memories of every failed attempt to meet his impossible standards. Every grade that wasn't good enough. Every dream that had been crushed by his disbelief. You can't be serious, I finally muttered, my voice small, barely a whisper. My father didn't even glance up from his plate, his attention completely absorbed in his own self-righteousness. I could see it now. He had no idea how much those words had hurt. He couldn't see me. He had never truly seen me. But this time, I couldn't take it anymore. I had tried to prove him wrong so many times before, but it had never been enough. And now, with his words echoing in my ears, something inside me snapped. A flood of anger surged through me, drowning out the pain. No more. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in his shadow. Never good enough, always fighting to earn his approval. I wasn't just his daughter. I was someone who had dreams, who had worked tirelessly to get to where I was. I had never been stupid. His words didn't define me. They never would again. But as my anger simmered, something else began to creep in. A deep, gnawing emptiness that made my stomach turn. My mother sat there, as she always did, silent, passive, retreating into herself. It was as though she had resigned herself to the fact that this was just how it was. She would never speak up, never stand up for me. I looked at her, waiting for any sign that she would speak out, but she didn't. She just kept her head down, placing food on the table as if this was all part of the routine. My heart broke. She was the one person who could have stood up for me, but instead she had become a silent spectator in my pain. Then the phone rang, breaking the silence. My mother hesitated for a moment, glancing at the receiver before she finally stood up to answer. My father's face twisted in irritation, not liking the interruption. He was about to say something when my mother's voice trembled, catching both of us off guard. Hello? Hello? Yes, this is she. What? Wait, are you serious? Her voice wavered, a flicker of disbelief in her tone. There was a long pause. The room fell eerily silent. My father looked up, his irritation fading into curiosity. He shot her a sharp glance, clearly annoyed by the disruption. My mother's face drained of color as she held the receiver, her hand shaking. Is everything okay? He demanded, his voice laced with impatience. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. It's from Stanford. They're offering her a place. I froze. The air around me seemed to shudder. Stanford. The school I had spent countless sleepless nights working toward. The dream I had silently chased while my father continued to dismiss me. I felt a surge of disbelief. Was this a mistake? Could it be true? What's going on? My father's voice cracked like thunder. He jumped out of his seat, his face contorting with confusion and disbelief. She can't. This has to be a mistake. She's too stupid for Stanford. I couldn't breathe. My heart raced, and for a moment I felt like I was floating above the scene, as if everything was happening to someone else. My father's words, his harsh dismissal, suddenly felt like a distant echo. I had spent years working hard, fighting for this moment, and now it was finally here. But the feeling of triumph quickly turned into something more complicated: revenge. The words that had come from my father's mouth, all these years too stupid, too slow, too unworthy suddenly, didn't matter. In this moment, the only thing that mattered was that I had proved him wrong. But something darker began to brew beneath my triumph. This wasn't just about proving him wrong. This was about making him understand the weight of his cruelty. About making him regret every single time he had underestimated me. I stood there, frozen in that moment of realization. For a brief second, I could see the flicker of something like fear in my father's eyes. He wasn't the god he had always believed himself to be. He wasn't infallible. And deep down, I could feel the small spark of something rising in me, a desire for more than just success. I wanted him to feel the pain I had felt for years. I wanted him to understand the consequences of tearing someone down instead of lifting them up. The fight had just begun. As I walked away from the dinner table that night, the weight of the moment settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. I had earned my place at Stanford, but now the next battle awaited. This wasn't just about academics or college acceptance anymore. This was about me taking control of my life and making my father see me for who I truly was. I didn't need his approval, but I needed him to feel what it was like to be ignored, to be dismissed, to be silenced. The more I thought about it, the more the plan took shape. This wasn't about just proving my worth, it was about rewriting the narrative of my life. I looked in the mirror as I stood in my room, my reflection staring back at me with a new sense of purpose. The anger, the hurt, it was all there, simmering just beneath the surface. But now I had a direction. Now I had a reason. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Every time I saw my father, I could see the unspoken regret in his eyes, the subtle shifts in his behavior. It wasn't enough. He didn't know the full extent of his mistake yet. He didn't understand that I wasn't just going to Stanford. I was going to become the person he had always denied me the chance to be. I was going to build my own life without him and without his approval. But the plan was just beginning. The journey wasn't over. And the deeper I dug into my need for revenge, the more I realized that this was just the first chapter in a long, drawn-out story. One that would unfold in ways neither of us could have imagined. I wasn't finished with him yet. Not by a long shot. The first few days after my acceptance to Stanford felt like a dream. I should have been celebrating, should have been filled with excitement about the future. But instead, a slow, insidious realization began to sink in. Nothing had changed. My father's contemptuous words still echoed in my mind. And the cruel dismissal that had once been my reality was now something I could no longer ignore. I thought about those early years when I still believed in his love. My father's approval had always been the golden ticket, the thing I chased endlessly. I'd spent my childhood trying to prove myself to him, doing everything in my power to win his favor. I remember the way he used to look at me when I was a little girl, when I would come running up to him with the artwork I'd spent hours on or the report card that was, at least this time, filled with A's. His eyes would briefly soften, and he'd give me a small nod, a gesture that meant everything to me. It was a moment of validation, fleeting as it was, and it filled me with a quiet sense of pride. But those moments had become fewer and fewer as I grew older. The praise, the words of encouragement had all but disappeared. Instead, his face grew colder, his expectations harsher, his judgments more cutting. I wasn't just his daughter anymore. I was a disappointment, a failure, a reminder that I was never good enough. And then everything had changed the night of the phone call. The night I had proven him wrong, and yet the victory felt hollow. Now, as I walked around the house, I felt the weight of the silence between us pressing down on me. My father didn't say a word to me after that phone call. He barely even looked at me. His world had shifted, his pride was bruised, and he didn't know how to handle it. I could see the way his eyes would flicker to me when he thought I wasn't looking, a mixture of disbelief and something darker. But nothing in his demeanor showed that he understood the depth of his words, or how deeply they had wounded me. The truth was, my father had never seen me not really. I'd spent years building myself up, trying to prove I was more than the daughter of a man who thought so little of me. But as I sat in my room, the weight of his cruelty settled like a stone in my chest. I remember the day I found the letter from Stanford. I'd just returned from a meeting with my counselor, and it was waiting for me in the mailbox. When I opened it, a flood of emotions hit me all at once: relief, joy, validation, but there was something else there too, a burning need for revenge. The anger I had buried deep inside for years surged to the surface, uncontrollable and raw. The fact that my father had dismissed me, treated me like I was unworthy of even the most basic respect, it was unforgivable. I was done being dismissed. I was done with the emotional neglect that had shaped my entire life. I was done with being invisible. But even as the rage threatened to consume me, I couldn't help but feel conflicted. Part of me still wanted my father to be proud of me, to see me for who I truly was. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt too many times, wanted to make him feel the pain of what he had done. And that was the part that I couldn't ignore anymore. I thought about all the moments he had robbed me of, the moments where he chose to belittle me rather than lift me up, the moments where he chose to turn away instead of offering a kind word. I thought about the sacrifices my mother had made to keep this family together, even though she too had been silenced by my father's power. She too had suffered in silence, choosing not to rock the boat, choosing to ignore the pain my father caused me. But I was done. I was no longer going to be quiet, no longer going to sit in the background and wait for my father's approval. I had earned my place at Stanford, and I would take that achievement and use it for something far greater than just personal success. But first, I had to make him understand. He had to feel what it was like to be rejected, to be underestimated, to be dismissed. The first clue that something was deeply wrong came just days after the phone call. My father, once so certain of his place at the top of our family hierarchy, seemed strangely unsettled. He began keeping to himself more, retreating into his study, avoiding family dinners. His presence in the house had always been commanding, but now it was almost as if he was shrinking, hiding from the truth that I had shattered the image he had built for himself. I'd known my father all my life, but now I was seeing him differently. He wasn't the all-powerful man I had once idolized. He was a fragile, broken shell of that man, unable to cope with the fact that his daughter had outgrown him. His facade was cracking, and I could see the cracks more clearly than ever before. It was around this time that I started to plan. I didn't want to hurt him in the way he had hurt me. I didn't want to tear apart the life we had built, the foundation of our family. But I couldn't deny that part of me wanted to see him squirm, wanted to make him realize the depth of his mistake. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't just some little girl, that I was more than his expectations of me. I wanted him to know that his words had consequences. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I wasn't going to seek revenge in the traditional sense, the kind that involved confrontation or anger. No, my revenge would be quiet, slow, calculated. I would show him that I didn't need him. I would show him that I had built a life for myself, one where his approval was no longer necessary. And in doing so, I would destroy him, not physically, but emotionally. His pride, his control, everything he had clung to, would slip through his fingers like sand. The first step was to leave. I'd been accepted into Stanford, and it was time to take the next step. But I wasn't leaving with a sense of victory. I wasn't leaving with a sense of finality. I was leaving with a heavy heart, knowing that this was the moment I would have to walk away from the person I'd always wanted him to be, the father who would support me, who would love me unconditionally. But he wasn't that father, and I had to accept that. The night before I left, I sat in my room, looking out at the city below. The world felt so vast, so full of possibility, yet I was weighed down by the emotions that churned inside me. Anger, sadness, betrayal, it was all there. But beneath it all, there was something else. Something powerful. Determination. I would make my father regret his actions. Not with words, not with anger, but with my success. I would become everything he never thought I could be, and I would do it without his help. I would prove him wrong in the most powerful way possible. The next morning, I packed my bags and left for Stanford. As the car pulled away from the house, I glanced back at the home that had once been my sanctuary. Now it felt like a prison. I wasn't looking back with regret. I was looking back with a sense of finality, knowing that this was the last time I would allow my father's words to define me. And as I stepped onto the Stanford campus, I knew one thing: this was just the beginning. I wasn't done yet. The real journey was only just beginning, and I would make sure my father knew it. He had tried to break me, but now I was stronger than ever. And one day he would see that. One day he would realize the depth of the betrayal he had inflicted on me. But by then, it would be too late.